Hi, I'm Peter Drury, Sky Sports commentator, and this is Unpacked. How do you find out the correct ways to pronounce names? The only way to find these things out is to speak to people. There are, of course, people at the club whose job it is to pass on this sort of information, and once in a while you get to speak to the players themselves and ask them how they pronounce their names. Even then, actually, it's not necessarily straightforward because there are players who prefer to have their name anglicised or are being kind, generous to the broadcasters and indeed to the viewing public by choosing to nuance their name in a way that is more accessible, more acceptable to perhaps the English-speaking ear. But we try to be as accurate and as consistent as we can. It's certainly one of the more complicated parts of the job on occasion, but once it's in there, hopefully you spit it out in the right way. Do you ever use binoculars to get a closer look at what is happening on the pitch? Certainly never use binoculars during the game. I wouldn't be able to keep up, and the focus would be tough to keep on top of while the action is flying up and down the field. I do use binoculars prior to the game. It's all about identifying players as sharply as possibly you can, and while they're warming up, I certainly focus in on them to see who's got long sleeves, who's got short sleeves, who's got a bandage around their wrist, who's got red boots, who's got yellow boots, who's got purple boots, who's had a haircut. All of that sort of stuff which makes players more readily identifiable in the sort of key moments of a game. But you couldn't possibly keep up with the game with a pair of binoculars whilst it's actually occurring. Do you plan what you're going to say, or is it all off the cuff? From the moment the first whistle goes until the moment the last whistle goes, it is all off the cuff. You couldn't possibly plan what you're going to say because you don't know what is going to happen. And if you start to pre-imagine things, you are leading yourself up a road to absolute torture, because you might think, what happens if so-and-so scores a goal for Arsenal against Spurs and it proves to be the winner? And even if that sort of scenario does play out, the goal won't be quite as you imagined it, and the words you might have preconceived wouldn't do it justice. So nothing that happens during the course of the game is in any sense scripted. It is entirely spontaneous. Clearly the moments leading up to kick-off, those moments when the players are in the tunnel and walking out and we have the graphics showing the team news and that sort of thing, that's what you would consider to be a sort of set piece. We know what is going to occur then, but during the game, what happens happens, and you have to go with it. How do you feel when a game is really dull? You get into conversation with the co-commentator, and Gary Neville always has something to say, and that helps when the game isn't particularly entertaining. But funnily enough, I rarely find a game dull. There's always a narrative, there's always something happening, there's always a talking point, even if that talking point is the dullness of the game. And why is it dull? You interpret what, if people are finding it dull, what's the reason for the dullness? Who needs to find a way of breaking out of the dullness? A football match is only boring if you perceive it as boring. If it's 0-0 with 5 minutes to go, you know, the fans are still on the edge of their seats because they might score or the other lot might score. This could make your day, it could break your day. 0-0 right at the end of a game is actually a very exciting scenario filled with jeopardy. So for me, it's never boring. How many stats do you need to memorise before a game? I don't know about memorise. I have a lot of stats in front of me and a lot of stats coming into my ears. Some of them, I suppose, I do absorb and memorise and would be able to recite off pat. But what I do have is a week's worth of notes that I've made. And those are all accessible to me. I try not to use too many stats anyway. I sometimes think a great sort of blur of numbers is too much and nobody's really identifying with those numbers. I prefer to go with the emotion of the game and with the people and the events. But stats are an important part of it, and where relevant, we try to play them in. What makes a good co-commentator? For me, a good co-commentator is one who sees and articulates things that the regular fan or viewer might not see, who doesn't just repeat what we've all just seen, but who interprets it, who finds a way to explain why a goal has been scored, what was the shortcoming defensively, what particularly special did the offensive team do to break the line, find a way around the outside, get to the byline, deliver the cross, all of those sorts of things. A good co-commentator sees an incident and has a view on it, a rational view and a credible view, which is based on personal experience and knowledge. A good co-commentator is sharp, and whereas I, the commentator, answer the factual questions, the who, the when, the where. A really good co-commentator answers the interpretive questions, how and why. What equipment do you have with you on the gantry? We have loads of equipment. We have behind me here all of these monitors, 4 of them, which show the program that's going to air, the match as the viewer sees it, the various different angles which don't necessarily go to air. We have part of what VAR is seeing when we get to those sorts of incidents. And on top of those, of course, everybody has a pair of headphones, everybody has a microphone, and all the gubbins that goes with them, turning them up and down, the various knobs and switches, most of which I don't really understand, but that's what gets it on air. Talk us through your match day routine as a Premier League commentator from waking up to going to bed. Okay, well, today's match day routine has been getting up at about 8 o'clock, and it's not an exaggeration or an untruth to say that I did actually sit in bed with my notes this morning, running through them before I even pulled the duvet back. Having got dressed and showered and all of those things, I watched Sunday Supplement on Sky Sports News. There you are, that's a very corporate thing to say. The full 2 hours so that I'm across all of the various footballing issues, and I think I've got the sort of weekend covered mentally. Came into London, I live north of London, came into London, left home at just after 11, got to Spurs here at just after 12, had a quick cup of coffee, came up here to do all this stuff, and then I will go and have lunch, hopefully meet a few people in the tunnel. If there's any sort of late news, if there's a bit of gossip, if there's stuff I need to know about the game, hopefully I'll have conversations with people who will be able to fill in those gaps. I'll get up here to the gantry probably soon after 2 o'clock. I like to be up very, very early so that I can just have a bit of peace and time to get my head set and to make sure I'm right across it and to be in a position to absorb the team news when it breaks an hour and a quarter before kickoff. Then I finish off my notes around that for that opening, for the graphics that offer the team news to everybody at home, and hopefully ready to go when the presenter says my name at 4:25. Do commentators ever struggle to identify a player in the heat of the moment? Of course they do. Like everybody else, if there's a great pile of bodies in the 6-yard box and we're all wondering who got the final touch, we're all wondering who got the final touch, and those are the tense moments you sometimes have to deal with. It's not always clean and tidy. Of course, as commentators, we love a really clean, crisp strike where everybody can see who scored the goal and it flies into the corner of the net. But a lot of goals aren't scored like that. A lot of goals this season, of course, are scored from set pieces, which do make them sometimes harder to identify. And I have to say, from a commentator's perspective, we rely in those circumstances very much on the brilliance of our match directors at Sky and the camera crews that work with them, who very quickly see via the various angles who has got the final touch, and via the immediate close-ups and so on, we're hopefully able to call the name relatively quickly. But even then, as viewers will all know, even then there are goals when 4, 5, 10 minutes afterwards we're still saying, is that a goal or is that an own goal? Does it belong to him or does it belong to him? And that's just how it is, and you can't worry too much about it. So yeah, of course, just like the fans, there'll be fans at every game in the country every weekend saying, who scored? Who was that? And in those very tense and exciting moments, very often we feel the same. Who scored? What do you do if you ever find yourself lost for words? I think the best advice to oneself under those circumstances is just shut up. If you haven't got the words, then don't worry about it too much and allow the game to speak for itself. Hopefully that doesn't occur too often, but it's always good for a commentator to remind himself or herself that actually the image of the game is the most important thing, and so what you have to say should only add to it. And if you haven't quite got the right words or you're lost for words, then just pull out gracefully until you've found those words. How do you avoid speaking over your co-commentator? Hopefully you avoid speaking over each other by staying in lane. As I mentioned earlier, the commentator is dealing with the facts, with who has the ball, where and when, what everybody essentially can see, identification and living in the moment. The co-commentator is interpretive and answers the questions how and why. Very often it's the case in terms of television grammar that when the replay kicks in, that's when the co-commentator kicks in, because that is when the explaining needs to be done. So if everybody stays in lane, it shouldn't happen too often. Of course it does once in a while, but it shouldn't happen too often that the commentator and the co-commentator clash.